Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, my name is Tori and today I'm going to share with you guys all the books that I read in the month of August. I read 5 books last month and that's pretty much my standard. I tend to read anywhere from 5 to 7 books a month, but last month was particularly exciting because 3 of the 5 books that I read were tomes. That never happens. I'm still not even sure how it happened, but it did. It was just a really great month overall. I do have one book in here that I didn't really enjoy, but on the opposite end of that, I have a book in here that was incredible. I feel like I'll be talking about that book for a really long time. But overall, I'm really excited to share all these books with you all, so let's not make this any longer and just get into it. So the first book I want to talk about is actually a novella, and that is The Ballad of Black Tom, and this is by Victor LaValle. And this novella is, how do I explain it? It's almost, I would describe it like a reimagining of this really racist Lovecraft short story. But the author, he has taken that story and he is now presenting it to us through the lens of a black man in Harlem in the 1920s, like the early 1920s. But in this, we're following a young man named Charles Tommy Tester. That is such a tongue twister. And he is just really trying to make his way in Harlem, doing whatever he can. He is described as a hustler, this almost like con artist type of character, but just really doing what he can to get by, to keep the roof over his head, but also take care of his father, whose health has been declining. So that's really where our story begins with Tommy, but things really take a turn for him when he is approached by this wealthy white man to come perform at his home one night, and he's offered like $500, which is, during that time, is enough to last like all year pretty much. But when he gets there, Tommy finds out that the man who invited him is just so strange and just kind of has this obsession with otherworldly things. And so the novel really takes a turn when Tommy leaves the house for the night after he performs there, and something tragic happens and we really go from there. My biggest issue with this novella, though, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, but the novella does end up switching perspectives midway through, and I was not expecting that, and I actually didn't really enjoy that too much. So I didn't really enjoy the novella as much in the second half as I did in the first half, but overall it was a really solid read, and if you're interested to pick it up, I recommend it. The next book I want to talk about is one that I binge read in a weekend, and I just completely flew through it, lost sleep, and it was so worth it. I really enjoyed this, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is the first book in a young adult fantasy series, and I really just think this came along at the perfect time. I felt myself starting to fall into a reading slump from July, and this really came out and saved me. So this was the first book that I read in August, and like I mentioned, just flew through it completely. In this novel, we're following 2 different perspectives. The first is Lou, and Lou is a witch, and you find out really early on that Lou has escaped her coven 2 years ago, and she's just been living in this city ever since, just trying to make her way as a thief and do whatever she can to survive, really. And then on the other hand, we have Reed, who is a witch hunter. He works for the church, and so the church, they just kind of rule everything in this city, and so the people who work for the church, they scour the city, hunt down witches, and burn them at the stake. So early on in the book, Lou and Reed's paths, they keep crossing, and this happens a few more times, but the final time that their paths cross, it's super unfortunate because that final time forces the both of them into marriage together. Reed, being a witch hunter, he doesn't know that Lou is a witch, and then Lou obviously is trying to keep that under wraps, being married to him. It's just the dynamic between them and the tension of that plot line is just fueled so perfectly, I think, throughout this entire book. And I really love the mystery aspect of it too, that really kept me guessing, like, why did Lou flee her coven and what's gonna happen, like if they're trying to catch up to her. I love the fact in this book that characters found themselves in situations that weren't conveniently gotten out of, if that makes sense. They didn't just get out of situations for the sake of advancing the plot in a certain direction. The situations they were in made sense. The way they got themselves out made sense if they got themselves out. And another aspect of this book that I really enjoyed was the fact that I thought Lou and Reed's perspectives were really distinct from each other. And a lot of the young adult books that I have read that have dual perspectives, you can fall into the trap of the main characters sounding exactly the same, thinking the same, and that just really was not the case in this, and I really appreciated that. So I really enjoyed this. I flew through it, and I have the second book already. The next book that I read was Song of Blood and Stone by Penelope, and this is the first book in a trilogy. This is an adult fantasy novel, and in this we are following Actually, let me back up. And this takes place in a world where we have one country that is separated from another by a mantle. And our story starts when our main character, Jasminda, who has the ability of Earth Song, learns that the mantle is starting to break down in some places. And on her way home, this is very early in the story, on her way home, she discovers that this man has crossed the mantle through one of the cracks in it. The two of them begin to form their own relationship as they try to tap more into Jasminda's powers and figure out what to do about this mantle that's breaking down. So that's pretty much like the foundation of our story. We do have another perspective in here as well that starts kind of intertwining with Jasminda's, so there's that. But overall, I didn't really enjoy this. I actually almost DNF'd this book. I really wasn't a fan of the instant love that started happening really early on in the story. I was still trying to find my footing with the world building and just feel more settled in the world, and she was already like starting to fall in love with this guy, and I was like, oh my god, can we please slow down a little bit? And even now that I've finished the book, I still don't feel like I really know a lot about Jasminda's Earth Song ability, and I just still have so many questions. And then just even beyond that, I wasn't a huge fan of the pacing in a lot of areas. It did seem extremely slow. Like, we had this really great and really kind of intense plot almost, but it just seems like we were just taking our time. Nothing was really happening. A lot of characters just standing around talking about things, and I just really wasn't a fan of that. Yeah, so overall, didn't really enjoy this, and I did end up unhauling it along with the second book in the series. The next book that I read is one that I also really loved this month, and that is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book in the Ballad trilogy. Aside from the characters and the plot itself, which I'll get into, my absolute favorite thing about this is the world building. I loved it. It was just so smooth, and it feels so comforting. I can't explain that any better, but it just feels like you just want to like be wrapped up in a blanket while you're reading this. The world building is so good, and it feels just so rich and so magical, and I love that aspect of this book so much. This is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy novel, and we are following our main character Nari, who she's just really trying to do whatever she can to survive in Cairo, and to do that she has been making her living as this kind of con woman. So she's just swindling people who come by her booth and just really doing what she can to get by. But Nari is called upon, or is it Nadi? I think I'm pronouncing her name incorrectly, but she's called to perform this ritual on this young girl, and in doing so, she accidentally ends up summoning this jinn, or this deva, named Dara. And oh my gosh, from there the world just opens up, and Nari just finds out so much about her past and her background and her family that she never knew before growing up in Cairo. And so it's with kind of that newfound knowledge that she ends up embarking on this really epic journey with Dara to the city of Brass, Ballad. So the first half of this novel is, I guess, like an adventure or travel narrative, because you do just have Nari and Dara just like walking across the desert and doing what they can to survive in the desert as they make their way to the city of Brass. I was finding the pacing getting a little bit bogged down in the first half of this book, but I think Chakraborty did such a great job of breaking up that travel narrative by offering a little bit of historical context and dialogue and really great action scenes, and it's so great. And so by the time the second half of the book rolls around and they're actually in Ballad, it becomes a lot more political, and it's such a great balance, I think, between the first half and the second. And in addition to Nari's perspective, we're also following this main character named Ali, and Ali is the prince, his father is the king, and just is this ruthless leader. And so Ali, he's just kind of timid in a lot of ways. He's really quiet, extremely smart, really book smart, and he really sympathizes with kind of the lower classes in the city. And so soon his path and Nari's start to cross, and it just becomes so epic and so good. I really enjoyed this. This was such a great read, such a strong start to what I hope is going to continue to be a really great series. And Dara, I love Nadi, but Dara, he is amazing. His like snark and just his whole personality, his character is just so well drawn, and this was such a great read. I highly recommend this. And then finally, the last book that I read in August. I'm so excited. I had to pick up my coffee again. Oh my god, I read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and this is the first book in the Poppy War trilogy, and the third and final book is coming out, I believe, in November. And there are no words. I'm serious. I don't even know where to start with this. I don't even know how to convey to you guys how much I freaking loved this book. This is hands down one of the best things I've read so far in 2020. So in The Poppy War, we are following our main character, Rin, who is a war orphan, and she lives in this really small, kind of forgettable village. But every year there's this major exam that students across the country take to place into these different academies. And the students who take these exams, they have been studying for the exam their entire lives. They are the children of warlords and politicians. They're extremely privileged, and this is like the next step for them. And Rin, she has just been dealt a really unfortunate hand in life. She doesn't have anything. She doesn't come from anything. And the future for her looks equally as bleak. And so with nothing left to lose, Rin takes it upon herself to study for this grueling test, memorize everything she can, and just work really hard to take this exam. And just the chances of her getting into any academy in this land, let alone the prestigious military academy Senegard, is just completely ridiculous. Like, her chances are next to nothing because they're pretty much non-existent. No one has any faith in her whatsoever. But Rin, she aces the exam. She goes to Senegard, and her training really begins from there. Meanwhile, war has been brewing in this really small island nation as they threaten to invade the Nakara Empire, where Rin and all her classmates and everybody else lives. And Rin, like all of her classmates in her year, they begin studying and honing their military skills with different masters at the academy. Some are studying combat, some are doing medical, but Rin, she finds out that she has an affinity for and more of like a pull toward the art of shamanism, and that she has this connection with the Phoenix god. The first half of this book is very much Rin trying to come into her own, being at this academy, studying, but the second half of this book is really focused on this war that has been building up, and we're following Rin through that. But also in the second half of this, we have another character who makes a return from the first half, and the story really starts to focus on him as well. So that was really interesting to see. There are very few novels that I would put in the realm of being a masterpiece, but I think The Poppy War it's up there. It's been a long time since I've seen a character just start 100% at rock bottom and just keep hitting rock bottom, but fighting so hard to make her own way and make her own seat at the table. And just the resilience and determination and the intelligence and the grit that Rin displays throughout this entire book is unlike anything I've ever read. This is absolutely phenomenal. While I love this book, I actually do not think this book is for everyone. I think it can feel really slow in a lot of places, and especially in the second half when we really get into the war between the Nakara Empire and that island nation. R of Kuang does not shy away from the horrors of that war and just the things that characters will do to come out on top. And I think that might be a lot for some people to read. I loved every second of this book. This is one of those books where just even reading the first couple of pages, you already know that you're going to fall in love with it. And it was consistently excellent from the first page to the last. And the ending was incredible. So that's it for me, you guys. Those are all the... Oh, why are you in there? I didn't read Blood and Honey. Those are all the books that I read in the month of August, along with the novella that I mentioned, and then also Song of Blood and Stone by Penelope. Let me know down in the comments how your reading month went and what you guys are reading right now, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care.